All right, guys. Johnny McGonigal, Bob Flounders, Blue White Breakdown, Wednesday morning, a little early, but there's nothing wrong with an early start. Johnny, I know you had a little vacay last week. I believe you got, I don't know, the rumor was you got to Pinehurst. If that's the case, man, you really know how to wind up your summer on a good note because I hate to break it to you, but our summer is literally hours away from being over. The Penn State opener, as we sit here and talk, is like 10 days away at
Yep.
West Virginia. I know you got to North Carolina. Was it everything you would hope? Was it everything? Was Pinehurst everything you hoped it would be?
It was. Yeah, I was able to take off a couple days last week for, we planned this thing months in advance to get down there and played 4 rounds in 4 days, Thursday through Sunday. We drove down from Philly, so it was a little bit of a trek. Broke it up on the way down, straight shot on Sunday through some rainstorms, so that was brutal. But the
Yeah,
trip itself was great. Any golfer, would highly recommend. Obviously, it's Pinehurst. It's
good for
like
you.
Disney World for golfers. It's
Yeah.
it's amazing. So had a really great time, but knew coming back, it would be 2 weeks till the opener, and very much looking forward to it, and looking forward to talking about the old Nets with you, Bob.
Yeah, that Sunday drive, especially if it's on 95, I don't really recommend it for anyone because of the high volume of traffic, the pitfalls. I think you get jammed up a little bit. Hopefully, it wasn't too bad for you. Greg Pickle and I drove back from the Masters on a Sunday, and man, it said 10 hours. It was every bit of like 15. So hopefully, you
Yeah,
didn't get delayed that badly.
it said it was going to be like
Oh,
7.5.
yeah.
It ended up being pretty much 10.
Yeah. There's
Yeah,
no way around it too. There's only one way to get home, and at some point on that journey on 95 on a Sunday, you're going to stop and you're not going to move for a while, but I'm glad you made it back. Let's Johnny, we're going to spend the bulk of this podcast. We're not going to it's too early to really talk about West Virginia. You just had a really nice profile. I think it's run now on PennLive. It'll be in the Patriot News later this week on Drew Allar. Obviously, is a guy that everyone's kind of talking about. Everyone's hoping for yet another step from him. But before we get to that, I was up at State College. Max Ralph was there with me for James Franklin. They made all the coordinators available. They made a couple of really key players available. Just a couple news and notes before we get to Drew. Of note, not that it's a big deal unless one of them get hurt, but it looks like Cam Wallace is going to be the third running back. James said the season had to start tomorrow. He'd be the guy. I just think if you remember what he said about Quentin Martin after the blue-white game, a young player that's talented, but maybe he just needed to kind of get settled a little bit. I think they really like him. I think they also really like Cam Wallace. And honestly, if Cam Wallace is playing a lot this year, you could look at it as a positive that he emerged, but it also could mean something happened to their two bell cows. But we'll just see how much we actually see of Cam Wallace. We didn't get to see that much of Trey Potts, but that's one bit of news. And also, Javen Williams, I think, is now going to work at guard. I think he played a lot at left tackle. They do cross train their offensive linemen, but it looks like that might be where his 2024 future is. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it sounds like James likes his offensive line. If there's any concern with Javen kicking inside, it might be, I don't want to say a scarcity of depth at offensive tackle, but he's been mentioning JB Nelson more and more as a tackle prospect. I think they like their interior, Johnny, but I just wonder. I think they're kind of holding their breath a little bit at offensive tackle and getting their top three guys through the season.
yeah. I mean, we kind of figured Drew Shelton was going to be that guy at left tackle, and it's really just coming down to, okay, how does right tackle shake out between Rucci, Donko, and I think JB Nelson will probably be in the mix there. And so if you're looking at Javen Williams, and he's not going to start on the left side, it's crowded on the right side. I don't mind them, taking a look at him at guard,
Mm-hmm.
and just giving him, a different position to sink his teeth into. And obviously, since he arrived on campus, he's been at tackle. So I feel like in a pinch, if they needed him to step up at tackle, he could play at tackle. But it doesn't hurt to cross train, like you said, Bob. And JB Nelson has done it, so why not with Javen? I think what's going to end up being, I think, Rucci or Donko would be my guess at right tackle, and then Nelson will be that kind of swing guy that you can just use plug and play as needed across your offensive line. I'm intrigued to see, and I think Max wrote about him, or you wrote about him last week. Cooper Cousins, that hype train still hasn't really stopped, and obviously, he's not going. I don't think he's going to start. Nick Dawkins seems to have a pretty firm grasp over that center job, but who's to say Cooper Cousins doesn't work his way in even week 1 against West Virginia? So, still some moving pieces on an offensive line that typically Penn State will not settle on its best 5 until a couple games into the season anyway. They like to work their guys in, so I don't hate it.
Yeah, so I was one of my favorite players to talk to, and they made him available, is Venga Ione. I just think he's just a really he's not a gentle giant. He's an imposing player, but with the media, he's always got a smile on his face. He's happy to entertain questions. I didn't ask him. He was asked about Cooper Cousins, and he just shook his head and smiled. And I'm not gonna give it away, but Venga said the future is I'm paraphrasing, extremely, extremely bright for Cooper Cousins, and it's going to be sooner rather than later. He is not. You can tell they think he's not your typical true freshman, either physically, mentally, his approach, all of it. It's really bodes well for him if he's healthy. Knock on wood. I think he's a huge part of Penn State's future. I'm not sure about the present, but if he's healthy, he's going to play a lot of football at a high level at Penn State. Venga is extremely impressed with Venga. But let's talk about Drew. Just I know you put a lot of time into your story. And there's been a lot of stories written about Drew, and understandably so. And he's been kind of forced to meet with the media at a very young age, which it's not typical for a Penn State player, but he's been in the spotlight since, almost since he got to Penn State and at the start of the 2023 season. So how did you approach maybe crafting a story about Drew, and kind of what did you want to focus on, and what was maybe something, because there's so many stories written about him, and I'm sure the kid is tired of getting asked, and Penn State reporters can ask the same question over and over and over. But how did you kind of approach it? What were your takeaways, and what would you say as we sit here, 10 days before the West Virginia game? What would you say you think is different about Drew?
Yeah, I mean, the premise, excuse me, the premise of the story that I put together that, like you mentioned earlier, Bob, is up on PennLive, and it's going to be a part of our mag coverage, preseason coverage there later in print this week. The premise of the story was just about his evolution as a leader, so I went into local media day a few weeks ago, not necessarily with that in mind, just in mind that I'm going to talk to as many people as I can about Drew and just see what stands out. Like what is different about Drew Allar now in August ahead of the 2024 season, his second season as a starter, as compared to even at the end of last season. And everything that came up was about his leadership, how he's handling himself. Julian Fleming said he does everything right. You talked to Jaywan Sider, who was, the co-offensive coordinator last year at the end of the year, interim after Yursich was fired. And he's talking about, how Drew has earned the respect of everyone in the room. And everyone in the room encompasses the entire offensive room, the staff, the players, teammates. One thing that really stood out was Andy Kotelnicki, the new offensive coordinator, was telling us that they do these things called the we are and we are not sessions after practice. And a player will go up to the front of the room in the offensive meeting room after practice, point out a few examples of good effort, of we are plays, if you will, and then we are not plays of laziness or misassignments or whatever. And everyone who is being commended or getting, kind of dinged is in the room and being held accountable, but it's on the player who's at the front of the room to hold those players accountable. And Drew has been very present, very direct, speaking with conviction in those we are not meetings. And so I just think he's taking that step. It's been a conscious effort, but it's also been a natural progression for him. Who this time last year told me that he was still trying to find that Sean Clifford voice. He was still trying to step into his own a bit. And so I think that's the biggest takeaway, one of the biggest evolutions of the offseason.
Yeah, and over the weekend, Penn State announced its captains, right? And I just thought when I looked at the captains list, I thought I was trying to figure out who it would be. I had a pretty good idea who a couple of them would be, but I just thought it was fascinating that Drew is a captain, and James spoke about that after practice. How he said what you said, like from stem to stern, everyone in the program, particularly on the offensive side, has just been very impressed with him in year 3, kind of just growing into a leader, and that is a job that you have to grow into. You're not going to be a leader your first year. But I just he's a captain, but so is somebody who's never really started a game at Penn State, at Nick Dawkins. And I think that juxtaposition says a lot really about both players. A quarterback in his 3rd year emerging in his 2nd year as starter as maybe one of the voices of the offense, but also, the guy that he's going to work very closely with, Nick Dawkins, who, I can't remember, Johnny, a player that has not really played a lot at Penn State. I know he's a veteran, but the respect that he has between the coaching staff and the program about him as a player, but as a person, as a confidant, like, it's very rare for a player to be viewed that way. But I think it just speaks to what maybe he is capable of. And we just have to remember that it just hasn't been easy cracking the depth chart at center at Penn State with what was in front of him, whether it was Hunter, Norzad, or Juice Scruggs. But I just think those guys as captains, I think, are very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And then one thing to add there too, and I mentioned Andy Kotelnicki before. So when it comes to Nick Dawkins, when it comes to Drew, when it comes to really anyone on the offense, when you talk to them this offseason, since Kotelnicki came in and was hired in December, there's just kind of been this kind of air of confidence and positivity around the offense. And, part of that is the offseason. There's always that hope for every team, every offseason. But you can really feel it when you talk to these guys, just kind of how, I don't know if relieved is the right word, but the scheme that Kotelnicki has installed. But more than anything, it's just been the attitude that he has, kind of brought to this offense and instilled in these players, and giving them a voice and giving them a platform to, obviously, like I mentioned with the we are not things. That's something that Kotelnicki brought in, so that's an opportunity for players to speak up and have their voices heard. But then more specifically, with going back to Drew, for example, he's having more of a say in the play calling, in what plays Penn State are going to be implementing and using week 1 in West Virginia and beyond. And I think you talk about juxtaposition, Bob. I think there's a juxtaposition, a difference between what Penn State's offense looked like last year and kind of how it was run. And I know some people in the Lash building were a little, not pleased with how non-collaborative sometimes Mike Yurcich was and how tightly wound he was. And so I think that breath of fresh air and that ability to make mistakes but learn from them and to have a say and have ownership in the offense, I think is big for Drew. And it's not just something that he's been given either. I think all the coaches say that he's earned it. So that's something to keep in mind, as the season goes on, is that it seems like, again, it's a preseason. So we'll see as the year progresses and how the results pan out. But it seems like so far it's been more of a cohesive unit, and more ideas and more opinions are being exchanged. And ultimately, I think that's good when you have 20, 21-year-old players who are ultimately running the plays out there and getting the results for you.
Yeah, and I think I was also thinking about this. I just remember last year with Drew, and there were some rough moments, but I mean, it did not fall all on his shoulders against some of the better teams they faced. But I just hope that the one thing I would say, there were some fans that were really, really agitated, but I think the fan base needs to remember, this is his 3rd year. He didn't get really a redshirt year. Trace McSorley and Sean Clifford didn't emerge until their third years, right? They were behind for whatever reason. You saw a little bit. McSorley was a 2014 recruit. 2015, he sat behind Christian Hackenberg. You saw what he could do in the bowl game, but year 3 is 2016, and it wasn't really till maybe the second half of that Pitt game where you could see he was going to be a difference maker. Same with Clifford. I mean, 2017 class sat behind Trace in 2018, threw that long touchdown pass to Daniel George. But, those guys were eased into the situation a little bit more, I think, than Drew was. So I just think that from a perspective standpoint, I know that, Drew's got elite physical tools, but he's basically at the same point in his career in a lot of ways that those two were, just in terms of growth and maturity and filling out and all of that. So I think that this is really the year. And he also 2023 was not a bad year by Drew. He just it was the games against some just killer defenses that, and it was more the entire offense than just him. But I think though, this extra year, this extra offseason should help him. But I did want to say this, Johnny. I keep hearing the same things, that it's clear cut, man. James Franklin is not blowing smoke. Options 1 and 1A in the passing game at wideout are Liam Clifford and Harrison Wallace, and he reiterated that yesterday. And then he eventually got around to talking about Julian Fleming and Omari Evans. But it just, I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, the glass half full is that those guys have just been tremendous in the offseason, and they've grown into these roles in their fourth year. But I don't know. I just think I'm looking at this wide receiver room, and I'm looking at last year's wide receiver room, and I just think when you look at Drew, I mean, you can only get the ball to Tyler Warren so many times. Maybe these guys really are ready for bigger roles. Maybe Harrison Wallace, a healthy Harrison Wallace, can be a 50-catch guy, because he did start 2023. He was a target guy in Drew's mind. I'm a little curious though that no one else is really being mentioned at wideout, I guess is how we put it.
Yeah, it's it's difficult because we've heard James Franklin talk about his receivers before, and even going back to last offseason when it was Keandre and Harrison Wallace are the clear-cut guys, and we saw Keandre made some big plays last year, but he also kind of disappeared down the stretch. Harrison Wallace, you mentioned healthy, and health with him. I mean, he just battled injury all last year. I'm really intrigued and kind of hopeful for him that he can stay healthy, because I do think he has some elite ability. I mean, his vertical is ridiculous. He can be that guy who can, catch a jump ball for you, 50-50 ball, and stretch the field, and also provide that security blanket like he did early last year in the West Virginia game. I think he had 6 or 7 catches.
He did
in that game. Liam Clifford is an interesting one because, maybe it's more of like a slot thing, like he's getting open, and he did show in flashes, and I want to emphasize flashes because it was here and there. But even in 2022, going back to when Drew would come in at the end of games, and Liam was on the field, you could tell there was a rapport there. And so, we know he's a hard worker. We know he, has learned a lot from Sean, his older brother, and in how to just kind of grind away. And I'm intrigued to see how he does in his fourth year at Penn State. I don't know if it's concerning that, James mentioned those two guys ahead of Julian, but I do think that you would like to see, him come out early in his Penn State career and make an impact. It's going to be an interesting year, and obviously a wide receiver room that we're going to be closely watching after, last year and everything else that went into that, because it wasn't just when we talk about Drew, and he had a pretty good year last year, 25 touchdowns, 2 picks, one of, if not the best touchdown interception ratio in the country last year. Everyone, remembers the Ohio State and the Michigan games, but, what no one forgets also is that this wide receiver room struggled to create separation. The play calling struggled to scheme these guys open. And I think, if as long as those receivers made those incremental improvements, or in some cases, significant improvements, and stay healthy. And
Mhm.
Andy Kotelnicki, who I think his whole deal is scheming open plays. Like
Yeah.
he is so creative and innovative when it comes to that. His offense, his base offense is pretty simple, but the way he uses motions and shifts and pre-snap disguises just to confuse the defense makes the simple play a big play sometimes. And so I think as long as those are all clicking, those side pieces are clicking, I think it can be a big year for Drew, an even bigger year than he had last year. We talk about his leadership. We talk about all those kind of intangibles that are growing and evolving and coming into the fore. Ultimately, we know he has to perform too. It has to happen on the field, and I think everything is kind of going towards that. But we'll find out on August 31st, Bob. We'll find out in 10 days.
We will. And one other thing, just one more thing on Drew. I think physically he's different. I
He
think that
is.
he's transformed
He is.
his body. James talked about it. He's dropped some weight. I don't know, depending, it might be 7, 8, whatever it is. But he just looks. He looks like he kind of had that baby. He had that baby face, those rosy cheeks, and he was just a big kid. But I think he's remade his body. And where I'm going with this, Johnny, is I think there is a level he can reach, a different level he can reach as a running threat. I mean, he was a little bit overlooked as a runner last year, but down the stretch of the season, he made some plays with his legs. I know that that's not ideal, that you don't want your quarterback who's that big, who's got a big target area. I think he took that shot, was it against Rutgers?
Yeah.
It was. But I do think, though, whether it's extending plays or whether it is once or twice a game, scrambling to turn a second and 9 into a 3rd and 1, whatever it is, I think he can do that. I think he is a little bit better of a runner than I think people give him credit for. And I do think if that emerges this year, I think that can really help this offense more than people realize, because it could be just the difference in extending a drive, 1 or 2 drives in a game against a good team. And I don't know that he was really comfortable doing that for the first 2/3 of last season. I thought he got better at it. And I just think physically, I think there's an element of that to his game. I think he did a little bit of that in high school, but he might have just been bigger than everyone else. But I don't think he's afraid to stick his nose in there. And I do think in the college game, you need your quarterback to make a couple plays. Obviously Trace did it. Obviously Sean Clifford did it. But that's an overlooked, I think, part of the game. It can't just be, hey, we got to put Bo Prabula in on 3rd and 2. I mean, Bo's going to have a role, but I'm curious to see if he can kind of elevate his game, maybe his mobility game this year.
Yeah, definitely. And even, when we were talking to James Franklin at Media Day back on August 3rd, I asked him about, just kind of Drew and, how he has grown in the offseason alongside Andy Kotelnicki and Danny O'Brien, the quarterback's coach.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a broad question. I just kind of let James take it whichever way he wanted to. And it was a good answer. It was a long answer. But at the very end of it, he did say that, Drew might be doing some things or will be doing some things that even you guys would be surprised that Drew would do just to loosen up the defense and keep them honest, basically. And I do think that's running. I mean, we've seen Andy Kotelnicki in the past, whether it was at Kansas or even Buffalo, use a little bit of option and not just read option, like speed and power option. Now, I think that suits Bo Prabula's skill set a little bit better, but then it's, when you put in Bo, it could be pretty obvious what you're doing. And so mixing in that a little bit, I don't think, would hurt. There were times last year that, and it's tough to tell if it was a read option or it was just an inside zone.
Where you're going with that,
But if it was a read option, there were so many times last year that Drew could have just kept it. The entire right side of the field was wide open. I mean, he could have been running for 20 yards. And again, it could have been just a design run. And so he doesn't really have that option. Or if he did have that option, he just wasn't maybe confident enough or playing it safe and handing it off to Nick or Katron. But man, I think there's a lot that they can do, even if he's not going to be Michael Vick out there. But even still, I mean, he dropped some weight. He was already a decent runner, an okay runner, passable. If he improves in that area, man, I think it opens things up, obviously, in the passing game, for him in terms of play action. but especially
Yeah.
for Nick and Katron to keep that defense honest and not just crash the box.
I do feel like, and that's something when Kotelnicki watched last season's tape, as somebody who is creative as he is, he had to have seen that, and he's like, you know what? If he's writing down notes, take the easy yards. Like, take the easy yards if they're there. Continue to drive, and I think Drew is ready for that. We'll see. But Johnny, it's about that time. I know you got a big next couple days ahead of you. Enjoy your final. This is your final weekend coming up before Penn State season starts. And if anyone who is listening to this that is not on PennLive or hasn't looked for Johnny's story on Drew on PennLive, you can catch it if you want in the Patriot News on Sunday, but you're going to be waiting a little while. I would just, if you haven't checked out PennLive in the last 24 hours, just go on there, look for Johnny's story on Drew. It's great stuff. Johnny, good talking with you. Welcome back to the start of football season in advance. I hope you have a great next couple of days. And I guess I'll be talking with you on Monday after James Franklin's West Virginia press conference.
Yeah, Bob. Looking forward to it. Also, going through a move right now.
I didn't want to say it. I was going to let you speak of that. But yeah, good luck, buddy.
If I look a little tired, that's why. Yesterday was U-Haul day, and it was 7 a.m. to 10 p.m.
Yeah. I know you're a young pup, but ibuprofen is your friend.
Yeah.
On moving day and the day after and the day after that.
Ibuprofen and coffee and writing good stories, Bob, for our readers and subscribers at PennLive. I know you have a lot of stuff coming up. I know Max has a lot of stuff coming up too. Just a quick plug. I was able to speak to KJ Winston's dad earlier this week, and we'll have a story coming out. I believe, this is publishing Wednesday, this podcast, I think Thursday morning on PennLive. Really good conversation with KJ's dad about, one of the best safeties, not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. So keep an eye out for that as well.
Sounds good. All right, Johnny, good talking with you.